Hello, everyone, and welcome to our February webinar. My name is Justine Chappell. I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager for ZAPP. In today's webinar, I'm going to be showing you how to use ZAPP to collect applications from non-artist vendors. As you may know, ZAPP now has the ability for folks to register not as an artist, but as a vendor, which lets you collect applications and information without having to worry about the visual art aspect side of things. Since this process for vendors is a little bit different, we thought we'd show you how to set up your event and application form for vendors, how to manage those entries, especially if they are separate from your jury process, and also how everything looks from the vendor side of things to give you that perspective. So let's get started. Let's talk about what is a vendor account. So basically, it's the same as a ZAPP artist account, but with a few differences. So we're on the ZAPP homepage here, and artists and vendors can both go ahead and sign up for a free account. You can just go ahead and click sign up here. And I'm going to show the sign up process. I'll just kind of skip through all these parts about personal information and then just get straight to the part where it differs for vendors. But let's just start here, and I'll show you how an artist or vendor might sign up. So just go through these really quickly. And, all of this will just be demo texts that aren't actually real. I'll just go ahead and put in an email there. And then we'll go through all that. And we'll skip the demographics part for now, just to show you this whole setup process. So we'll just put these in there. Oops. Doesn't even matter. Denver. Okay. And so, they'll enter their contact information. They can add social media links, websites, anything like that. And then here's the part that is important to talk about today, and that's the profile type. So the profile, they can select if they're an artist or non-artist vendor. If they select artist, then they have to just choose from these medium categories. These categories are more internal for the ZAPP team, and administrators such as yourselves in ZAPP can't see this, but it does play into our promotional e-blast where we can target ZAPP artists based on what categories they select. So as an artist, obviously, you'll get these artistic disciplines here, whereas the non-artist vendor, if they choose that, they'll have some categories here that are kind of basic vendor categories, but they can also choose, the other type or things like that if they're our vendor. So choose artist or non-artist vendor. We'll click on vendor, and then that's it. That's the only difference for a vendor. I'll go ahead and click that. Those categories. They can subscribe to the same email communications that we send out to artists and vendors, so they can, select which ones they want to be opted into. And then once they're done, they just click submit. I'm not going to do it because I'm not setting up this account. I'll actually log into a vendor account that's already existing. But that's just to show you a little bit about the sign-up process for vendors. So let's go ahead and switch over to my vendor account that I actually created. And the ZAPP side, portfolio side is all the same for artists and vendors. Just how they use it might be a little bit differently. So I might go to the portfolio, and in here, it's basically, the same as artists where you can upload artwork images, booth shots, files, or save statements. But obviously for a vendor, these photos might be a little bit different. They might not even have to use images at all. They won't know until they get to your application or your events form to fill out if they actually need images, at which point they can return to their portfolio and upload those images. But, if they want to upload artwork images of their, products or their food truck or whatever it is, they can upload artwork images, or they can upload booth shots, and that will just, be there for them in case they get asked to upload photos on their application. And I'm going to show you in the back end how you can accept or not accept photos from vendors. So we'll get to that when we get to the administrator side. And they can do, upload any files they might need or save statements, things like that. So it's all the same. And the ZAPPlications page, apply to shows page, calendar, all of that is the same as an artist account. For applying to shows, if they just go to apply to shows, look at the list of events. And here for vendors, if they want, they can come to this filter on the left and go to application type. And here they can filter for events that accept vendor applications. So if they were to choose artist, obviously those would show up for events that are only accepting artist applications. They can choose vendor. You'll see, though, if I apply the vendor filter, that we don't actually have events here, and that's because these events would be only accepting vendor applications and not accepting artists. And so far on ZAPP, we have yet to have an event or a show come up where it's only a vendor style show and not artwork based. That might come in the future since we just added this whole vendor feature, but right now it's just, if they select vendors, they're not going to see anything. So a vendor would want to come here and click the both filter so that they're getting applications or events that are accepting applications for both artists, but also vendors, so they know that they're, eligible to apply to any of these events here. And then the application process is the same. Let's say they find an event they like. They can click more event info. They can review the event information. Hopefully they have some vendor-specific information on this page here. And when they're ready, they can just go ahead and click apply. They'll agree to the agreement, and just like artists, vendors will come here and fill out the application. We'll get into the nitty-gritty about how to build the application specific for vendors and how to, bypass this artwork field. But if a vendor were to come here and see that they need to upload images, that's the point where they know, okay, I need to go back and add some vendor images for my portfolio. So they can come here and add that to their application. And then I'm not going to go through the process since we did just go over the artist side in a previous webinar, but here they can fill out the application, and when they're done and it's submitted or ready to submit, they'll go to that checkout process page where they'll pay any jury fee if applicable and do anything like that in here. So obviously I don't have any active applications, but if there were, they would be able to go through the checkout process just like an artist would. All right, I'm now going to hop over to the ZAPP administrator side. So I'm logged in here as an administrator. I'm going to show you how to set up your applications properly to accept non-artist vendor applications. While I won't show you the entire process of the event setup and application builder, I'm going to touch on some key points of the process that pertain to vendors and what you'll need to pay attention to that's going to be important if you collect vendor applications. So we'll start in the events management page, which is where we are here. And we'll go to our demo event and click on the event editor. So I'm just going to go through some steps on this page. Starting in the event information tab, what you want to pay attention to here is this question down below. What types of applications do you accept? So the options here are artist, non-artist vendor, and both. So you'll see it's a lot like those filters that we saw on the apply to calls page or apply to events page. Here, if you're accepting vendor applications, of course, you could choose non-artist vendor, but that's, again, only if you're accepting vendor applications. But if you're accepting both, you'll click both. Then go ahead and click save. And you'll see here, we get an error that says, now we have another question that's not submitted for. And that's because if you choose both, then it'll ask you the separate question, okay, now what types of applicants need to submit images? And in this case, then you can say here whether or not only artists need to upload artwork images, or if all of them do. Again, you might not choose it, but a non-artist vendor, that would mean that only non-artist vendors would need to submit images. So not really common, you might not do that. But if you need everyone to submit images, you can click all. In this example I'm building, I'm actually going to say that only artists need to submit images. Vendors, I just need some information from them, and then they can apply without submitting their artwork images. And then I'll show you later on too how we will make it so that if I wanted to accept images from vendors, I might include a little more explanation for vendors on the application form. But again, we'll get to that in a moment. And then I'll go ahead and click save so that saves that second question. Moving on to the jury details, there's only one thing here that you want to pay attention to for vendors. I mean, obviously you'll want to fill out this for, the information for everyone, but here is that one specific question about what types of vendors are excluded or ineligible. So just go ahead and enter any info about what kinds of vendors are excluded. Maybe you're not accepting food trucks, or maybe you're only looking for food trucks from the jury, or maybe who's ineligible to apply. So you can put that information there. And that's what artists or vendors will review before applying to your call. So put that all information there. And actually, I forgot to mention one other thing. So back on the event information page, the other thing that you will want to do if you're accepting vendor applications is to put some information in your general information section or event summary or rules to put some information about, how vendors will apply to the event. So vendors might need to know specific load-in dates or have some specific info about what's going to be required of them. So they'll want to review that. So you just want to make sure you're including information for both types of applicants that you're accepting entries from. So, we did those jury details. That was all you need to see there. And then on the application editor. So I'm going to go through this section and show you all the things that will pertain to vendors. First up, we have the medium categories editor. Here is where you'll put out those different medium categories you're accepting, and artists can go ahead and say which one they're applying to. That way it's a little more organized for you when you're managing applications and when you're jurying them. For vendors, you can go ahead and create, different types of vendor options for the categories. The other option, if you don't want to do that, is just to do an all vendor category, so that if they're a vendor, no matter what type, they can just choose that category, and then you can have all your vendors separated out. But it's up to you how you might want to do that. There's also going to be other ways that I'm going to show you how to separate your vendors from everybody else. So if you want to be more specific in your categories editor, you can do that. Next up is the application custom questions. Here's where I'm going to show you how to essentially create two applications in one. So you can have one set of application questions for regular artists and one set of questions for vendors. First, I'm going to address this description of materials and technique question here. So this is a built-in question that will be on all ZAPP events, and that's required for every applicant to answer. Now, since this is mainly geared towards artists, you may want to have some information on the application form to clarify how you'd like vendors to fill out this section. So what you can do here is click Build New Question and select the informational only question type. This will give you a chance to write some instructional text on the application. So it's not going to appear as, an application question. It's just going to show up on the application form. So here I might say, vendors, this is just a label for myself, material and technique. Oh, that might be too long of materials and technique. And then here I'm going to copy and paste some information that I already written out about how that this is pertaining to vendors only. And it's basically just describing in the description of material and technique section, please enter some basic information about the summary of the products you offer. So this is just saying, we know as an artist, you may not have this question ready, but here's what we'd like you to say. And I'll just go ahead and click Create Question. And when I show you the application, I'm going to actually preview the vendor application. You'll see how we have, the medium category, like I showed before. We've got the description of materials technique, and this is where they would type in their answer or insert a saved statement from their portfolio. But then you'll see right below that now, because we've built in that informational only question, it will appear as such. So vendors only, in the section above, please enter some information. So you'll see later too how when we build out the rest of our application, this will remain at the top so that it will always appear directly underneath the description of material and technique section. All right, and then back on to the application builder, we're going to create some questions for our artists and vendors. And so what I'm going to do here is show you how ZAPP has the ability to create questions using conditional logic, meaning you can set up questions to display or hide depending on the answer to a previous question. So in this example, I'm going to have a completely different set of questions for artists and a completely different set for vendors. But what I want to do first is set up a base question to ask whether the person applying is applying as an artist or as a vendor. So to do this, I'm going to click Build New Question again. I'm going to click the single select type because I'm going to build out options for them. And I'm going to basically just say vendor or artist. And this is going to be a required question for everybody. And I'm going to paste this question that I have here. Are you applying as an artist or a vendor? And then we'll want to add our question types. And then click Create Question. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the artist questions first. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it, click Build New Question. And let's do, a text style box. And then in my title, I'm going to label it vendor or artist so that I'm aware of what questions are the artist ones and which ones are the vendor ones. So for this artist question, I'm going to label artist. And I'm going to label at, I want a bio, like an artist bio. So I will do this and copy that. And then here, we are actually going to enable the conditional logic setting. So in the previous question with our base of are you an artist or vendor, we actually left the enable conditional logic setting off, and that's because that question will appear to everybody. Now in this case, we're going to leave the enable conditional logic setting to on, and I'm going to build out these rules here. So currently it says show this question if any of the following match. That's good. We'll leave that as is. And now I'm going to say select a question. So it'll list all of my application questions here. And I'm going to click vendor or artist. And then I'm going to say is. So I want this question to show if vendor or artist is artist, because this is an artist question. So I'm going to leave that as such and click create question. And then I'll just repeat those same steps for my artist question. So, go ahead and build a couple more out. And we'll go through it. And in this one, we'll also enable conditional logic, and we're going to select that same question. You'll see we have our second question built in here, but we're still pertaining all of this to our base question, vendor or artist is artist. Click create. And let's do one more for artist, field new, text. And I'm just going to call this one artist, why? And this is going to say, why do you want to participate as an artist? Enable conditional logic. Vendor or artist is artist. Great question. Okay, so now let's say I'm ready to move on to my vendor questions. I'm going to click build new question. And these are going to be, different questions that I have for my vendor. And so maybe instead of an artist bio, I want more of like a history of their business. In this case, I'll click enable conditional logic, show this question if vendor or artist is vendor. And I won't bore you with creating multiple, but I'll go ahead and just add one more vendor question. This will be equipment. And put that in there. Enable conditional logic, show this question if vendor or artist is vendor. Now, you can get pretty fancy and technical with putting together these rules to show or hide. You can make it so that if all sorts of different rules match up, because I can create multiple rules at once, if they all match up, then it might display or hide differently. But I'm just showing you a very simple, very generic way of using conditional logic to set up application questions depending on the applicant. So that's my second vendor question. And you'll see here now we have our labeled questions on the left. And so it's easy to figure out which questions are for who. And I can also change the order. Again, I'll want to make sure that materials and technique informational only question is set to 1 at all times. But if I need to change the order, I can. So now that we've set up our 2 sets of questions, I'm going to go ahead and show you the preview. I'm actually just going to refresh our page here. Again, you'll see all the same stuff at the top. We've got that informational only question. And here, now all you can see is that base question we added first. Are you applying as an artist or vendor? And then you'll see as I click artist, now we've got all those artist related questions. But if I click vendor, we've only got those vendor questions. So this is nice to be able to, separate out those vendor types or artists and vendors and have them answer different questions. There are other ways you can do this. If you have questions that are pertaining to both artists and vendors, you can have that question first. So, in here, I might add a question that will display, after materials and technique and before our base, split off question, that fork in the road, we can ask some other questions. And so you can do that where you have as many questions as you need for everybody and then split it off between vendors and artists. So that's kind of just how to build out that application form depending on it. And make sure you do click on that preview because then you can test out to make sure that all the correct questions are appearing for the correct applicant type. The last thing on the application editor that I'll want to show you about vendors is the media sample settings. Now, This is setting the number of images and booth shots for artists and or vendors, depending on that question you answered back on the event information page. If you're accepting images from both artists and vendors, then both artists and vendors will have to pay attention to the number of images and booth shots that you're collecting from them. If you want to collect from only artists, like we are in this example, then, this won't actually pertain to the vendors, and that's fine. You'll see here, we did open up that vendor application preview, but let me go ahead and open up the artist preview. And you'll see that we got the same questions here, but opposed to the vendor one, which would just end, the artist one does have that artistic or those artwork images section here. But let's say you are accepting images from vendors and you want them to upload some images, but you need to instruct them on what to do, what kind of images do you want them to submit. In that case, I suggest building another informational only question. So you might put that here and you'll say, vendor images. And this might also be a, vendors only, please upload images below that represent your products, business, etc. And that might pertain to our vendors only. So I'll click vendor artist is vendor, and I'll click create. And then let's preview I'll preview the vendor application again so you can see that. Again, if they click vendor, then they're going to see this thing here. Because we currently have the setting turned off for images to vendors, it's not going to show me this portfolio section here. But because this image I created or informational only question I created is going to be at the bottom of the questions, then it'll simply be at the top of that artwork info section. So if you are accepting images from vendors, I highly recommend you create something like this to instruct vendors about what kind of images they need to upload. All right, so that's the application editor. The last step of creating your application is the product editor, where you're going to set up your jury fee. Now, the jury fee is going to be the same for artists and vendors, so you can only set up one jury fee amount and apply that. You can't have two different jury fees, and you can't really create like a vendor fee. However, you can create coupon codes for vendors if you don't have a jury fee for vendors, or if it's a discounted jury fee. Maybe vendors aren't actually juried in your event, so you don't want to charge them for a jury fee if they're not going to be juried. So in that case, you can go to that events coupons. And in the coupon manager, we already have one here. It's a 50% off for vendors, and we have this vendor code. That's the discount code that they can put on the checkout page to discount the jury fee by 50%. We can also set a set dollar amount or 100% off if the vendor doesn't have to pay. But that's how you can get it so that vendors don't have to pay the full jury fee amount. Now you can give this code to them on the event info page saying that this only applies to vendors. Use this code to discount the fee. Or if you want to get fancy with it, you can build on your application. You can nest it in that conditional logic questions about the vendor coupon code. And it says, if they select a vendor and they answer all these questions, it gets to the bottom of the page and it says, okay, now here's your coupon code to apply at checkout to waive or discount that jury fee. So those are all the steps for setting up your event for vendors. And we just touched on those vendor aspects, and then you'll be good to go for your event to collect vendor applications. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to manage vendor applications once you received them. This process may differ for you depending on how you handle vendors overall, but I hope you'll gain some tips from what I'm about to share with you. I'm going to change our event here actually, so I can show you some applications. So application statuses can be used to organize applications, obviously. So we've got these different application statuses here, and you should be pretty familiar with them based on your everyday use of ZAPP. So you already know about received. This is where all applications will go when an artist or vendor submits it. We've got the invited status and the not invited status. These are where those applications go after the jury process, whether they've been invited or not invited. And for the next one, for invited artists, once they go back and accept their invitation, they are moved to the accepted status. Then once they pay any post-jury fees, such as their booth fees or deposits, they will be in the confirmed status. And then you also know about incomplete and exception statuses. These are used to allow artists or vendors to make changes to the application before the deadline, which would be the use of incomplete, or after the deadline, which would be exception. So those are the statuses you're probably most familiar with. Now, you could also use statuses to hold vendor applications. So, for example, you might use exempt from jury. This would be if vendors are excluded from the jury process. So that's a good one to keep them separate, because anything in the received status is going to be juried. So you might want to, if vendors aren't going to be scored, then you can put them into exempt from jury. One tip, though, is that if you don't collect images from vendors, such as, maybe you turn that setting off for vendors, then they actually won't appear in the jury, even if you leave them in received. And that's because the jury only pulls in applications with images attached to them. So you could just leave them in received. But if you want to separate them out, exempt from jury is a good one. If you don't want to use exempt from jury, maybe you already have some group of folks that are exempt for a different reason. Maybe they are past winners or board members, and you'd rather keep them separate from your vendors. Then you could use a different status. You could use other. Other is a good catch-all for any sort of group. As long as you know what those applications are and what they mean and why they're in an other status, then you can go ahead and use that for vendors. And then maybe you might also want to use reviewed. So you could just have, you know what reviewed means. Maybe vendors don't get juried and you just need to go through and review them and make sure they're eligible to participate. You can put them in reviewed to know that they're ready to go and ready to be, essentially invited to the event. But you can keep them in reviewed in the meantime. So if you do jury vendor applications, what you'll want to do is keep them in the received status. But you can actually use categories to help differentiate. And I don't have any applications in received right now, but I'll just go ahead and click on our confirm status to show you this technique. And as you saw before, when we created our medium categories, you can come here and sort by category as well. So maybe in this example, we might have a food truck category. This is actually changing the status of them, so I'm going to put it back. But in the search applications box, I can actually search by medium category and search for those food folks. And you'll see we have all of our vendors who are, in that food category. So categories are really good to help differentiate them as well. And then when you get to the jury side, you can jury by those categories. So you can have the jurors look at the food trucks separate from the artists themselves. Again, make sure you collect images from vendors if you want them to show up in that jury portal. Another good way, in addition to categories, is to use tags to tag the applications as vendors. So you'll see here we have all these tags for vendors. If I were to add anyone as a vendor, let's say maybe I have a different category in here. Let's see what miscellaneous might be. I don't have any miscellaneous. Okay, well, you can go ahead and just create a vendor tag, and I'll just delete this one right now so I can show you how to create it. It's pretty simple. You just come to the create tag section and you add your tag and click add. You can also go and click on the application itself, and that will open up the full application for you to review it, and then you can tag it as such from here. You can add up to 3 tags in addition to your deposit tag. You can add up to 3 tags here. Let's go ahead and go back. And then once you have any tags set, you can go ahead and filter by tag. So I can say filter by tags and select my vendor tag. Maybe I have a generic vendor tag, which includes folks in different categories. So I might have an apparel category. It's separate from a food category, but they're all tagged as vendors. So you can go ahead and search for applications based on the tags. Now, the tags are actually really helpful because they will come into play when you're emailing your artists and vendors, and I'm going to show you that next. So keep that in mind, that tags might be the most useful thing here for you. And, tags are just a good flagging system for any sort of reason. You might want to flag folks as well, but flags are more either flag or unflagged, whereas tags, you can customize different tags and keep them, separate from everyone else. So let's jump into that emailing part. So, keeping applications that are from vendors separate from artists kind of help when you need to send information to them. So let's go to our events communication section. And, the obvious step when you're emailing artists or vendors is to select the status that those folks are in. Maybe they're in multiple status, or maybe they're just in one. Let's say for this example that I have some information to send to my confirmed vendors and artists, and I want to send them load-in times and what time to show up to bring their equipment and everything. So I can first click on confirmed. But let's say I'm going to email my artists first. Well, what I want to do is I want to filter the application statuses further, and I want to exclude anyone tagged. So when I display that, this will list all of the tags that I have available. That vendor tag we created, I'm going to exclude the vendors so that everyone left and confirmed are only my artists. And then when I click select, you'll see the email form pop up, and I can go ahead and email my artists. Once I get through that process, it's pretty self-explanatory, and click preview and send. I'm ready to email my vendors. So I'll click confirmed again. And this time I want to include only tagged or flags. So I'll include those vendors and then I'll email them. So in this case, I'd only be sending an email to those 4 vendors. And I'll send those off. So that's how you can use tags to separate out emails when you're sending them to artists or vendors. And then another tip I have here is to use templates. So in ZAPP, you can create templates or choose from any, generic ZAPP templates we have. If you click edit templates, you can edit. We've just got some, test templates here. But if you were to create a new one, you would just fill out a blank form and click save, and that would add it to your template. So you can create templates for vendors and artists. Maybe you have different sets of information for them and you want to email them separately. Templates will be saved for your ZAPP account year after year for every event. So you can use that same information and maybe update, dates and things like that. But it's really nice to be able to save those email templates. And that's pretty much it. So, from this point, everything's pretty much the same between artists and vendors in terms of getting these email communications to them. Maybe you want to include information about when they need to return to ZAPP to purchase. And then, of course, you can set up any of your post-jury fees for vendors, just as you would for artists. In this event, we've got some post-jury fees set up. So maybe some of these things here would be, vendor-related or vendor-specific. And the same process for them goes, once they're in the invited status, they can go back to their ZAPP account and purchase those additional fees and then, become confirmed. So that process isn't much different for vendors. And that's how you would, manage your vendor applications that you create. And I hope you learned a lot. This concludes our webinar about creating and managing non-artist vendor applications in ZAPP. I hope you gained some helpful insight or methods that you can take and use in your own events. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to having you at our webinar next month.